Please welcome Shelby Rowe.
All right, now let's see if I can figure out technology, get my presentation up. All right. So let's get this to work. Yay. Okay, hold on just a second. Yes, I get real excited when technology works for me. Okay, good morning. Let's get started. Before we did have is that we were going to do a grand entry and those plans got messed up. So we're going to do that here for you.
Dakota means friend, friendly. The people who gave that name to the Dakotas have sadly never been treated as friends. The people whose language was used to name the Dakotas and Minnesota and Iowa, Oklahoma, Ohio, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and other states, the Native American tribes, the people who were here before us, long before us, have never been treated as friends. They have been treated as enemies and dealt with more harshly than any other enemy in any of this country's wars. The original sin of this country is that we invaders shot and murdered our way across the land, killing every Native American we could and making treaties with the rest. This country was founded on genocide before the word genocide was invented, before there was a war crimes tribunal in The Hague. When we finally stopped actively killing Native Americans for the crime of living here before us, we then proceeded to violate every treaty we made with the tribes, every single treaty. We piled crime on top of crime on top of crime against the people whose offense against us was simply that they lived where we wanted to live. We don't feel the guilt of those crimes because we pretend they happened a very long time ago in ancient history, and we actively suppress the memories of those crimes. But there are people alive today whose grandparents were in the business of killing Native Americans. That's how recent these crimes are. That we still have Native Americans left in this country to be arrested for trespassing on their own land is testament not to the mercy of the genocidal invaders who seized and occupied their land, but to the stunning strength and the 500 years of endurance and the undying dignity of the people who were here long before us, the people who have always known what is true.
All right, so let's get started with our presentation. If you need to reach me down at the bottom, we've got a hashtag for us, for all of you who are much better at Twitter than me. Save the Indian, save the man, hashtag AAS20. I no longer live in New York City, but I'm not smart enough how to change my Twitter hashtag, so it's still Shelby Rowe NYC.
Truly sacred in this world.
Sorry, I messed up on the sound. It'll stop. Suicide prevention, I'm really good at saving lives. I'm really bad at technology. Here's my disclaimer. My views for this presentation are solely my own. I am solely responsible for the nonsense that I am about to share and my views. These views don't represent my employer, don't represent AAS, all Indigenous peoples, doesn't represent my tribe, my family, or friends. So with that, let's go ahead and move on. Doing suicide prevention in tribal communities is interesting because we often overlook that the common belief in our country for years was that the only good Indian is a dead Indian. This is something that was echoed in something by our former president, Theodore Roosevelt, saying, I don't go so far as to think that the only good Indian is a dead Indian, but I believe 9 out of every 10 are. And I shouldn't like to inquire too closely into the case of the 10th. Kill the Indian, save the man. This was the motto of the boarding school movement. It was at the core of many assimilation efforts to change our people. I apologize, my voice is quivering a little. I was so moved by everyone who's here at the event. I hope that this is an emotional thing for everyone else too, and not just me. So forgive me for my voice quivering, but wow, I'm so honored that so many of us are here. This was policy for us. It was to change everything that was Native. Our children were taken away from their homes. They were beaten. The brown was scrubbed from them. They were scrubbed in bleach water to remove the brown from their skin. Their hair was cut, clothes removed, forbidden to speak in their native languages. And yet we're still here. In our country, Native Americans have faced genocide on every front, from outright killing of natives to we have endured ecocide, the killing off of our crops, of our food through relocation. We were taken away. If you can control the food source of your enemy, you can control them. And they definitely did that by putting up dams to block salmon from getting downstream. They did this by killing buffaloes and forbidding us to grow and plant our own crops. Through the termination of treaties, land rights, which is still happening today. The separation from our homelands, separation from our families, from our cultures, and just the complete annihilation of our cultures. I rounded up just a few of the important dates for US oppression of Native Americans. You know, we all know the first line of the Declaration of Independence, but what you may not know is that in there, you know, all Native Americans are referred to as merciless indigenous savages. We were not considered humans then. And part of the Declaration of Independence was a declaration of war on the initial people who were here on this continent before the colonizers showed up. 1830, the Indian Removal Act. I'm not going to read you all of those, but instead I want to tell you about the woman in the picture. This is my ancestor. This is Mourning Tree Allen. Mourning Tree, her name spelled mourning as in sad. She was born in 1833. So it was after Indian Removal Act had passed, but our tribe, the Chickasaws, our relocation did not begin until 1837. During that time, during those years when it was very tumultuous, our elders would go in the woods during ceremony and they would hug the trees and they would say goodbye to all of their ancestors and their homelands. Her name translates to woman who weeps for the trees, or the tree that weeps for her. She was 5 years old, an orphan, when the Chickasaw removal started. The family was prominent. She lived more like Scarlett O'Hara than the Indians you see on TV. They had a big plantation just south of Memphis in northern Mississippi. And the family stayed for 10 years until she was older. They were allowed by the tribe and the US government to wait till she was 15 to have to be forcibly relocated. She was a healer, a midwife, a medicine woman. You can see this picture was taken in the 1890s. You'll notice in 1884, all quote unquote pagan ceremonies were banned. That's all of our religious, spiritual healing practices were banned. And you can see what a big threat she was. Anyway, moving on in our lovely tour of oppression. The Dawes Act, we Native Americans didn't believe in property ownership. Property belonged to Creator, and we were stewards of the land. With the Dawes Act, they divided up our land in Oklahoma per person to individual property ownership, which may seem typical American, but it was devastating to our families. And of course, they didn't just divide it up. They gave an allotted amount. And this was another way to take more land away in Indian territory, because they said, oh, well, you've got more land than you have adults, so we're going to take this land back. They started imprisoning our tribal members. And in 1902, they even went so far as say that no man could have long hair. You could be put in prison or killed for having braids. When things get rough for me, I like to listen to music. And I know a lot of my fellow AAS fans like music. So we're going to have a little bit of a chair dance party to help us get through the rest of these historic events. I was going to use real soundtracks and everything, but with everything being online, and I certainly don't have enough money to buy music rights, so I put out a call on Facebook for my extroverted friends who like to sing, and they helped me out by recording little snippets. So we've got some songs brought to you by some friends of mine to help us remember those good old times when some pretty monumental things happened in Indian country.
I don't need no other love. Oh, baby, it's just the you I'm thinking of. Don't be cruel to a heart that's true.
I'm going to keep up awkward dancing so that you guys don't feel bad. I can't see you, but you can see me awkward dancing. When we were all jamming out to Elvis, the Indian Relocation Act of 1956 was passed. Up till that point, only about 6% of natives lived in urban areas. We all lived in our tribal communities. And the government, like, well, we can't have that. We can't have them still in their communities. We got to get them out of there. So one of the final steps with assimilation, once they realized the boarding school era had failed to destroy our cultures, was to take working age natives and move them all across the country to places like Los Angeles, San Francisco, Detroit. They put up Indian community centers in those areas to help with the assimilation. But what happened was the American Indian movement was born, because all of these working age natives that were moved to new cities, they formed new communities, and new civil rights groups were formed in actions. So what was meant to be devastating for us actually helped organize and bring us together.
Come and get your love, come and get your love, come and get your love now. Come and get your love, come and get your love, come and get your love now. Come and get your love. Come and get your love.
So when we were jamming out to Come and Get Your Love, the government, one of their other tactics to get rid of us was forcibly sterilizing Native women. They were trying to keep this secret. It was happening through the 1960s and 70s. But through the AIM movement and their occupation at Wounded Knee, they were able to release documentation to show it was policy, BIA, IHS policy to sterilize Native women. They believe, depending on the community, up to 25% of Native women were sterilized during this period. When I was a kid in the 70s, my grandmother told me to never carry my Indian card on me. She said, no, if something happened and you got hurt, they would take you to the Indian hospital and you'll die. I thought she was just really paranoid, but she wasn't. There were horrible things happening to Native women. It was just another way to end our treaties, because some of our treaties state that the treaties are valid until a certain percentage of the tribe is no longer within a certain blood quantum range. So statistically, the government stacked the cards against us, because if you sterilize all the full-blood women, you will never have more full-blood citizens in those tribes. Here's my beautiful niece. Her video didn't feed well, but it was so cute, I had to add it anyway.
My heart must be true. Nothing left for me to do. You're the one that I want. You are the one I want. Woo-hoo-hoo, honey, the one that I want. You are the one I want. Yoo-hoo-hoo, honey, the one that I want. You are the one I want. Yoo-hoo-hoo, what I need. Oh yes, indeed.
So there was actually some good stuff happened in 1978. 1978, the American Indian Religious Freedoms Act was passed. In 1978, we were allowed once again to practice our religion. So we talk about freedom of religion in this country. Really didn't have freedom of religion until 1978. There's still some limitations on things, but at least the law was on our side for the first time in centuries. Also, the Indian Child Welfare Act. From back when the boarding school days started, it was just government policy that a Native child was better off anywhere than in their native home. Horrible atrocities occurred. If you want to watch some of it, there's a new movie, Indian Horse. I think it's on Netflix right now. You can check it out. Talk about the boarding school era up in Canada, which was similar to what happened here. But at least then the law said that before they could take an Indian child, they had to consult with the tribe. And the tribe got the first opportunity to place that child. So we were given permission to keep our children in 1978.
Someday somebody's gonna make you wanna turn around and say goodbye. Until then, baby, are you gonna let him hold you down and make you cry? Don't you know, it could change. Things will go your way if you hold on for one more day. You hold on for one more day. Things will go your way. Hold on for one more day.
Some more good news. In 1990, the Native American Graves and Repatriation Act was passed, which meant that all of the museums and universities and research labs that when the tribes, they had to open up their records so the tribes could see what they had, because up to that point, that it was believed that all Native cultures in the U.S., were going to be extinct. And so they were digging up graves to, quote unquote, preserve our culture. There were people that could go to a museum and literally visit their grandmother's bones on display at the museum. And so this began the process of these, the remains of our ancestors getting returned home. Here it is in 2020, 30 years later. Many of the children who went to boarding schools, who died at boarding schools, the tribes are still working with the government to bring those children home for proper burial. In my family, my relative, Mourning Tree's mom, Betsy Love, in the state of Mississippi in the 1950s, a high school class learned about her. She was a prominent woman in history, and they felt real bad that this Native woman who made history in Mississippi was buried in a Chickasaw cemetery. So they went and dug her up and buried her at the high school. My ancestor is a high school mascot, so we're still working on getting her back to be properly buried in her cemetery.
'Cause if you like the way you look that much, well, baby, you should go and love yourself. And if you think that I've been holding on to something, you should go and love yourself.
So while we were all jamming out to Justin Bieber, the Dakota Access Pipeline protest began. It was started by 5 young people who were part of a youth leadership group, and they wanted to go protect the Missouri River. There's a pipeline that was moved there. You can read all about it. That movement, those kids going and wanting to make a difference inspired individuals all over the world to show up, and it brought tribes together like never before. It also opened up the eyes of many to see how our government treats natives. Pull up some footage. I didn't put it in my presentation. It's a little hard to watch, but some pretty atrocious things happened during that protest, and the pipeline was built. One more song to round it out. You might think, what else could have happened since 2017 for Native oppression, because we're all enlightened these days. But, when this next song was playing, there was something else that was pretty awful that happened.
What a man gotta do, what a man gotta do, to be totally locked up by you. What a man gotta say, what a man gotta pray, to be a last good night and first good day.
So just a few weeks ago, the federal government, the BIA, revoked reservation status, the reservation of the Mashpee Wampanoag Indians. This is the tribe that greeted the Mayflower. That after all these years, in 2020, we are still terminating rights in this country for Native Americans. We talk a lot in our field about trauma-informed and what makes Natives at higher risk. And so we can't talk about trauma-informed suicide prevention without talking about all of the injustices. And let's be real, there has never been justice for Indigenous people on this continent, and that absolutely plays a role in our risk for suicide. Let's look at Thomas Joiner's theory. After I rolled things over, policy in our country is, again, the only good Indian is a dead Indian. Kill the Indian, save the man. There were signs on people's yards, no dogs or Indians on the grass. So this is what we've grown up with, of not feeling welcome in the US, and that everyone would be better off if we just didn't exist, so that the narrative could be however they wanted it to be. So that sense of perceived burdensomeness, thwarted belongingness that we see in Joiner's interpersonal theory, it kind of makes me laugh, because every Native lives at the intersection of that. And then our acquired capacity for suicide, we serve in the military higher than any other ethnicity. And there are a lot of other things that come from the gene pool and epigenetics of surviving over 500 years. So a lot of bold risk-taking, fearlessness, higher pain tolerance, all of that goes into it is just consequences of our oppression. Big news, the policy, when you set out to kill the Indian, it does indeed kill the man. And in our tribes, that shows in the data, our men are at greatest risk for suicide, specifically our young men. Our young men that are looking to see, what is my role in society? What is my place? They don't find their place in US society because the culture has been pointed for years to the fact that they don't belong, and that the only way to succeed is to fully assimilate and fully give up anything that is who you are. And many young Natives are choosing, am I supposed to be modern or traditional? How do I hold on to my views? And so the new roles of being modern Natives are coming into play too. But our rates, yes, they're higher for our young men, but that's not the whole story. When we look across the lifespan, American Indians actually have a lower suicide rate for males and females. I don't think, even as a Native suicidologist, we don't often share, yes, we are so focused on saving lives, but there's some good news in our data. Now, there's other stuff we can get into on how we don't get counted in urban areas and all of that. So there is, take this data with a grain of salt, because there is some inaccurate counting. But don't believe the stereotypes. Just say, what's a Native? I had a dear friend of mine that I stopped being their friend this year, because they had said, when I think of a Native man, I just think of a homeless alcoholic who's suicidal. And I was like, wow, when I think of a Native man, I think of my dad. I think of the many artists that I know. I think of my sons. And if that's what you think as a mental health professional, that Native men are alcoholics and all suicidal, I don't feel safe around you anymore. We do know, it's again, 70% of us live in urban areas, and the reported drinking is way less than that of non-Hispanic whites. So don't believe the stereotypes. When we're looking at suicide risk in our communities, It's not about what's wrong with us. It's about what's happened and what is still happening to us. Through epigenetics, we've inherited a lot of really good survival instincts and some that really don't serve us well anymore. I am not an epigeneticist, so I will give you a very layman's version of this, but look it up, Google it, it's super cool. Basically, we found that trauma changes our DNA, and not just our DNA, but up to 3 generations after us. So what that means is, we talk about our grandmothers and stuff and our wisdom from our grandmothers and our cultures. My tribe, we call it blood memory. Our ancestors knew that things that happened stick with us for generations to come. But if our ancestors faced a life-threatening event, a traumatic event, that changed their DNA, and also the DNA of their children and their children's children. The egg that formed each one of us was made in our grandmother's womb. So think back, what traumas did your grandmother face? What about her grandmother? What about her grandmother? Many cultures, have trauma. Many of you in other cultures have experienced this trauma. It's impacted your families. For our Native families, every single generation since 1492 has had trauma that we've dealt with, and that has definitely taken a toll and an impact. The common historic trauma responses, these are rampant in our Native communities and in our Native families. Depression, PTSD symptoms, psychic numbing, our self-destructive behaviors, things that people do to help numb out, recklessness, intense fear or intense fearlessness, fantasies, poor affect. There's a lot of attachment disorder in our communities, and strong suicide ideation also can be a historic trauma. That the world would be better off without you is what the world has told us for over 500 years. But the difference between a tragic tale, I know we're laying a lot of heavy truths. I told Jonathan they were really bold to kick off a 3-day suicide prevention conference talking about genocide. But there's an inspiring story behind this as well. And that's what we need to focus on. That after over 500 years of genocide, every possible way to eliminate our cultures, we are still here. Our cultures are still here. That we survived over the last 500 years is pretty remarkable. Our cultures are still alive. They're still evolving. These are shakers, pictures of women wearing shakers. In our tribe, when we have ceremony, the men sing and the women, they shake. They shake these shakers on their legs, they dance and keep the beat. To speak to Creator, you need to have male and female there to pray. They used to be made out of deer toes. Then our tribe moved on to turtle shells. That they put river rocks in the turtle shells. When turtles made it to the endangered species list, they moved to milk cans, the milk cans that came in the commodities that the government provided after relocation. And that's what they use today for the shakers. The culture's still evolving. They're still praying. It's just changed. We've got a lot of community strengths. A good thing that came out of the destruction of our families and the death is that Natives were good at building our own families and kinships, aunties, uncles, nieces, nephews, cousins. We're there for each other. In the Oklahoma City area, I'm part of a group called Matriarch. We are matriarch sisters. We look after each other's kids, families, and help each other like sisters because we all need family, and our extended families from the past, our clan system was destroyed. So we're good at making those now. We have that shared sense of community responsibility. We have the ability to walk in 2 worlds. Many of us, as you saw on the list, We go to the same schools, have the same education. Other cultures call it code switching. We call it walking in two worlds, of being able to function well in the mainstream world, but still maintain our native identity. And we've got a fierce community pride because we know we're survivors and that we're resilient in the face of multiple challenges. There are still hundreds of cultures that have survived genocide. This is remarkable to me when you look at all of the policies that were put in place to destroy us, and we're still here. This picture, when I look at this, it's one of the most beautiful selfies I've ever seen. But when you look at it, you may see something different. You'll notice their hair is messy, they're wet, they're looking pretty disheveled, and the background is a hot mess. But I know what happened just before this picture. I know the trauma that these women went through. This is my friend Tracy from my Matriarch Sisters group, and her daughter Elena. Elena is getting her PhD in linguistics, and she is one of only a handful of people helping to revive the language of the Caddo Nation. She has old recordings her great-grandparents made speaking the language that she has been translating and creating teaching materials. Tracy is a regalia maker. She is a culture keeper for the Caddo Nation. One of the few people left who understands burial ceremonies, who teaches others these ceremonies, teaches how to make ceremonial clothing for dancing, for praying, for burying, for birth. They were down in Texas last year attending culture days at the Caddo Mounds, because of course they don't get to live on those grounds anymore, but once a year they get to have culture days at a state park. And so all the culture keepers from the Caddo Nation were there, and they were hit by a devastating tornado. So while the rest of the world was freaking out and grieving what happened to the cathedral at Notre Dame, during that time, Oklahoma Indian Country was freaking out over what had happened to the Caddo Nation. All of their culture keepers were in that building that is clearly destroyed. All of their vehicles were destroyed, the building destroyed. Where the chair is there in the middle of the picture, and there's that little hole underneath, that is where Elena and Tracy crawled out to pose for that selfie. They didn't know if they were going to live. It was a big storm front, and they knew there was another tornado heading their way. But they crawled out, they knew they were alive, and they took a picture to prove that they had made it. In case they died in the next wave, they wanted to have proof that they had survived. The good news is, when the tornado had devastated, it was a miracle that none of their culture keepers were killed in that tornado. Several were critically wounded, but they all survived. We are extraordinary survivors. And as we look at suicide prevention, that's what we need to promote. Let's stop focusing on what is wrong with our communities, because we're not your problems to solve. We're not here for you to rescue, for you to save. Our resilience, our strength in the face of adversity, maybe look at us, we're your answers to discover. How have we survived all of the oppression that has come our way? We're your answers to discover. I thank you. Yakoke, Chapisalato. I'm going to leave you with more music that's super inspiring to me. Thank you so much, AAS, for letting me kick this off. As I mentioned, after Standing Rock, many tribes came together. We're experiencing a really cool cultural renaissance. And this video was put together by a group called Illuminatives, highlighting a lot of the strengths of our culture. So I know we covered a lot of heavy material, and I got to leave you with some of the beauty of our people from across the country. So again, Yakoke, Chapisaloto.
people, we stand all together, one voice saying yes we can. Each one, reach one till we pull ourselves up, cause we all one fam. From the rest of the block to the Perry to the Rock, we connect that love. Cause the people with power feel the power of the people when we stand as one.
I got you stuck off the realness. We be indigenous, you heard of us. Max Heaven, the murderer, spreading the love with the water and earth. The stand against hate, gotta know what the purpose is. We rise, the climate is changing, the signs of the times. It's time to start praying. Pray for the world and community. Prayers are more powerful when we're in unity.
What I know.
Up today, hungry for a change, new path to take. Can't stay the same, it's been too long. Pointing out who's right or wrong, can you hear me out? All we need is a little bit of love. Take time to heal and it starts with us. Hand in hand, I put my trust. In one world, reunite, it's a must. Hold on to hope, we can overload. We can break the code with a single note. Sing out for the world to hear that our time is now, no more for tears. I looked into my son's eyes, a new day in a new light. Lift the veil and dwell so peaceful. Come together, one world, one people.
What I know, we are one. What I know, no, we are one. It's who you are, it's who I am. We all bleed the same blood, yeah.
We got beautiful differences, let me give you a peek. Over 500 tribes, but we all unique. And if we could not compete to eat, nothing compete us. Jealousy is more dangerous than diabetes. See this unity? Imagine what it looked like. You would think we would do whatever it took, right? I would do anything for this good life. We could do anything if we unite.
Young native, you are my savior. So you're praying for our inspiration. From the block to your reservation. Any color, all my relations. From the basement, worldwide invasion. Every day we're painting our faces. Fighting back but learning our language. Dancing our dances, saying our prayers.
One choice, one earth, one love, one birth, one life to live. One life to live, yeah.
One people, we stand all together, one voice saying yes we can. Each one, reach one till we pull ourselves up, cause we all one fam. From the rest of the block to the Perry to the Rock, we connect that love. Cause the people with power feel the power of the people when we stand as one.
Well, thank you, everyone. That concludes my presentation.
Shelby, oh my goodness. That was phenomenal. I've been watching the chat. You touched our hearts. You opened our minds. You made us feel uncomfortable in all the right ways. Thank you so much for this opening. What we're going to do now, And just so that people know, yes, this is going to be one of the recordings that's going to be available as part of the virtual academy.